we would like to sort of let you guys be aware of. For those of you that joined us last week, you would have heard us talk about a mystery prize. We are doing a competition for the month of October based on the attendance for these iTOOsday sessions, the prize of which I will talk through at the end of the session. So please, do join us again for the last two remaining iTOOsdays. You might stand a chance to win a fantastic prize. But if there's nothing else, I think let's kick on. So let's talk through the cyber landscape. What's driving what you're seeing from an insurance perspective, what's driving what you're seeing in the news. And you will see some of the news articles popping up on your screen now. You would have heard about a few of these attacks. TransUnion had quite a large sort of well-publicized a breach a year or so ago, and they had a massive ransomware of 225 million rand. And this is something that is not uncommon. We've seen the rise of extortion demands coming with how we are doing business, with more business putting value on the technology, putting more value on the data that they're using in those businesses, leading to hackers realizing that sometimes it's not really about the money, it's about the data, which then turns into the money, because for that data and for those systems that they lock, they are then able to extort you by means of a ransom attack. This scheme is another one that I'll touch on, particularly because this has highlighted the information regulators' role when it comes to data governance and safeguarding data, where under POPI you have certain controls that you need to be meeting, and where you had a cyber incident and a data breach as part of that incident, they are then investigating, and where they think you have fallen short, there are enforcement notices and potentially even fines being imposed. We saw the first fine being imposed earlier this year. That was to the Department of Justice, and they were issued with a 5 million rand fine following lack of following through with the enforcement notice that came prior to the actual fine. So again, just showing you that the regulatory landscape is quite active in South Africa, following many other regions in the world. And then just to look at some additional key stats, we always look at the interesting reports that come out from various vendors, two of which are on the screen at the moment. We had a report from Sophos, who are an endpoint and firewall provider. They produced their 2023 State of a Ransomware report, and some of their findings include 49% of the companies that were surveyed, they exploited vulnerabilities as the root cause. So vulnerabilities, again, in terms of your patching and not patching, or just not being aware that you need to update certain parts of your network, have been quite a large cause of those breaches. And also what we keep seeing is that compromised credentials, that 24%, is in another attack vector that has been common in South African businesses. 78% of companies reported some kind of a ransomware attack in the last year. This is up from 51 in the previous year, just showing us again how the landscape keeps evolving. There's a lot more activity. There's use of what we call 0 days, and that's also proliferating. How we seeing these attacks. Another stat is that from those who have suffered some kind of a cyber incident, only 19% of those have taken longer than 1 month and up to 6 months to then recover following a breach. So this goes back to us talking about how significant a cyber breach can be, the impact not just from a financial perspective at the time, but also how long it can take you to fully recover. And by fully recover, we're talking about getting back to the same levels of production where you were before the incident, getting back to the same levels of confidence from your clients, and even then, and also recovering from any revenue impact that you may have suffered in the short term, and some of those impacts can be much longer. Another study taken from the inside of the mind of a hacker surveyed some hackers who were willing to to answer some questions, and they've given us some feedback in terms of what they, as the people who are attacking your systems, either as a white hat hacker in terms of your security team who are testing your systems by hacking and then fixing whatever they found, or via being a black hat hacker who's trying to hack your systems for malicious intent. 84% of those who were surveyed found that there are more vulnerabilities now than there were pre-pandemic. Part of this would be due to the nature of how businesses have accelerated their growth in tech and their growth into having to work from home. So as businesses have moved more and more away from your traditional office space, there's been more gaps that have opened up with the advent of work from home. As much as we love to work from home sometimes, it has created some opportunities in certain businesses for the threat actors to gain access into your company's networks. Another stat is also 84%, but this time talking about 84% believe that less than 80% of companies do not understand the true risk of being breached. And that is exactly why we're here today, is to sort of unpack what those kind of ramifications can be, both on the cyber incident side as well as on the managerial side. And these are some of the stats that that are really quite powerful for you to understand that if I, as a threat actor, believe that your business is not equipped to handle what I can throw at it, what are you then doing for yourself and for your clients to ensure that, one, your security is further improved, and two, do you have a safety net that can assist in the event that you do then suffer those attacks? And that's where the insurance element comes in. Another key stat on the slide is the 45%. Unfortunately, from those that have suffered some sort of attack, 45% had felt the need to pay a ransom. Again, talking to how detrimental the financial aspect of suffering a breach can be, where you now have to fork over hard-earned money just to get back access to your servers. The last that I want to just highlight on the screen talks to the average cost to recover. And this is the South African stat that has been taken based on South African data. Small sample set, but worth noting. Currently, the average cost, and this is from the Sophos report, it's 14.25 million rand, and that does not include the ransom payments. Again, going to what would you need to get back your customer confidence? What would you need to do to upgrade your servers, your systems, potentially, if you weren't already at a good place for that? So including all of those costs, your downtime, as well as any other residual consequential costs that come post-breach, that's the number that a lot of businesses are looking at. Now, imagine you're a small business. Is this something that you would be able to even contemplate covering? How would you go about, covering these kind of costs? And this is, again, where risk transfer through insurance can assist those kind of businesses. But let's play out a quick scenario. Let's put you as the broker in the business's hands, and you tell us how would you respond as we go forward. So imagine yourself as the MD of SecureFin. SecureFin is a fictitious business, but they are a medium-sized financial service provider. It's rugby season now, so all of us are enjoying the rugby. I'm sure many of us were very excited with the Boks win on Sunday. So you would have had a braai, had some friends gathered at your home. And so you're the MD of SecureFin. You're preparing to watch the rugby. It's a Sunday evening. You left the office on Friday. Everything was in order. You felt that you've got the right teams to manage your IT security. But then you get a call. You look down and it's your IT manager. You don't typically get calls from your IT manager on a Sunday evening. So you walk away from the crowd to a quiet space and you take the call. On the other side, your IT manager is panicking, speaking quite fast and almost incoherently. You ask him to take a breath. So he takes a breath and says, "We've been hacked." What goes through your mind in this moment? I'm sure it's panic, it's fright, it's all that could go wrong with the business. All the time you spend grafting, building what you try to build to where it is. and you can almost see it going up in smoke right in front of your eyes. So you ask, what's happening? What have we done? What's going on? What's going on with the business? What do you need to do? So you find that the incident involves a exploited vulnerability. Your client system data management has been compromised. Therefore, some sensitive data from your clients and your employees has been compromised and leaked to the attackers. This was based off a spear phishing email which targeted one of your high-level employees. They unfortunately fell victim to this, gave them their credentials, which had then access to more critical areas of the business. One thing that popped up on the screen when you did log in to try and check was a README note. The README note then popped up and gave you this note that you're reading now on the screen. So a ransomware note. Just stating, if you're reading this, your network has been penetrated and your files and data have been encrypted. We know you have hundreds of employees and thousands of customers. We have gained access to all of your servers. We know the data we hold will damage your reputation if it is published or sold online. Contact us below immediately to pay the ransom, and we will decrypt your data and safely return it. So the attackers are telling you they've got what they've got. They've encrypted. You can see that they've encrypted part of your network. They're also telling you they've got the data, and now they're asking you to contact them to pay a ransom. So let me ask you, as the MD of this business, what is the first thing you would do? Can we please run the poll? The first question. There's a poll that should be popping up on your screen now. Please engage and tell us, what would you do? Give it a minute or so just to get some responses. We're already on 340 responses. Just let's see if we can get closer to 60%. If you have a question, please post it in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll try and tackle those later. With over 400, we'll give it another few seconds or so. But it seems to be one very popular response that has come out. If there's another thing that you would do, please pop that in the chat. Let's see if you don't agree with any of the answers that we have posted.
Lwando, Karen says that she would select all of the above. Is there merit in selecting all of the above?
Well, I mean, one of the answers says do nothing, the other one says do something. So you can't really select all of the above. Yeah?
That's why you're the expert.
Definitely a stiff drink. Okay, I like that. All right, okay, we've given it 2 minutes. I think let's end the poll and let's show the results. Can everyone see the results? Just give me a thumbs up or something. I can't really tell.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you can see the results.
Great. So I'm glad to see an overwhelming majority of you have said trigger your incident response plan. That is definitely not a bad place to start. A few of you said, you will call IT support. A few of you would rather just have a quick drink, just to calm yourself. And 1 or 2 of you said they'll just close their eyes and hope that it all goes away. And a couple of you also said that you would start engaging with the attackers to start paying the ransom. All very interesting responses. But what I want to do now is take a look at what is the impact? What are your duties as a manager? What would then be some of the risks that are posed by you? And this is where I'll hand over to Jonathan, just to take us through. My screen changed. So just take us through, spotlighting on the directors. What's your fiduciary duty? What is your responsibility? And how does that link back to this scenario?
Thanks, Lwando. I think firstly, for giving us the context to the cyber breaches and the environment we're seeing at the moment is very relevant. In the past, we've always referred back to the global state of cyber risk. The World Economic Global Risk Report over at least the last 5 years has recognized cyber risk as one of the top 5 global risks. And fraud and theft of data and large-scale cyber attacks has always been up there in the top 5. But we've definitely started to see that coming closer to home. So before it was the big losses we saw in the US impacting directors and officers and businesses, some in the UK and internationally. But from that slide deck that you showed, we're starting to see that it's certainly coming closer to home, and by no means South Africa is not immune. So that definitely creates a lot of responsibility on the directors and officers of companies in South Africa. And, as we start to depend more on technology in our businesses, it creates a lot of efficiencies, but also a significant amount of risk. And that risk sits with the board of directors and the senior management team, because it's the responsibility of the directors and officers to ensure that there is sufficient security in the environment to deal with these cyber threats, both to protect the personal information of stakeholders, but also for the business itself to continue to operate. For all the stakeholders who could be affected by a cyber breach. And so that responsibility is quite a scary thought, that you can't just rely on a question to your IT manager on whether or not your internal security controls are sufficient. The responsibility sits with the board and with the senior directors and managers to actually make sure that there is the risk mitigation in place, that there is a proper plan and risk control in the environment, and that they're ultimately responsible for any breach that does occur, or for the outcome of any breach that does occur. And that responsibility on directors can result in a number of potential liabilities to directors and officers personally. And that can be either a civil liability claim brought against them. It could be a criminal liability or even a regulatory investigation. And so that kind of net of potential liability against directors and officers is something that needs to be considered and understood. And so some of the risks that we see as a result of a cyber breach for directors and officers are highlighted there on the screen, and by no means an extensive list, but some of the areas that we believe really need to be brought to light when talking to clients, and understanding where these risks sit for directors and officers and how potentially they can be transferred to insurance. And so the legal and regulatory scrutiny. Following a breach, officers and directors are required under legislation to respond within the regulatory framework to that cyber breach. And so that regulatory scrutiny will come against both the business, but then potentially against the directors and officers in their personal capacity if there's been a failure to exercise their fiduciary duties in maintaining the control in the environment. The most, I think, significant consequence of a cyber breach is the breach of trust, in your organization, and that ultimately affects both, your customers, your suppliers, and potentially your own internal staff. And so, where you have that reputation, breach or that breach of trust, it's very difficult for an organization to recover from that. And so, what you see is, ultimately, loss of share value, loss of shareholder value. And potentially that business, going into decline following a cyber breach, if they haven't got the necessary steps in place to recover quickly from a data breach. There's, of course, significant financial consequence, both from the potential for having to respond to that cyber attack in terms of payment of ransom. But as I say, as a result of the breach in the environment, the potential loss of trust and reputation could result in ultimate business decline, and that can have a significant impact on businesses. And so all of that sits then with the board to ensure that they have exercised the necessary control in the environment. And so that sits with both requirements in terms of the Companies Act for directors and officers to act in terms of their fiduciary duties to the company, and to make sure that they have, in fact, exercised that power that they have within the business, to make sure that there are the proper control measures within the company to mitigate a cyber risk or a cyber loss. And it also refers to the King IV Code in the practice principle 12, where it really recommends that for directors and officers, they need to assume responsibility ultimately for the safeguarding of technology and information security within an environment. And so they need to assume the ultimate responsibility for the governance of the technology and the information security. They need to approve the policies that give effect to the direction of a strategy, both for the technology implementation in the business and for information security. They need to delegate responsibility and make sure that they've implemented at an executive level, strategies to mitigate potential loss within the business. They need to exercise ongoing oversight, and that's why I said, before it might have been easy enough to do the checkbox and ask your IT head, are we okay? And if it gives a thumbs up, then all fine. But that's really not enough. You need to be able to evidence that you've maintained this ongoing oversight. And then also to obtain independent verification or assurance to make sure that response plan is in fact correct and robust, and that a business can recover from a cyber breach if it does occur. And then obviously to be able to report back on any incidents that have occurred, and to monitor the effectiveness of any remedial actions that are put in place. So that board governance and oversight is the responsibility of the directors and the officers, and that sits squarely with the board. The shareholder concerns obviously is what we've talked about in terms of the financial consequence, and any loss of shareholder value as a result of loss in or the financial consequence on the business could ultimately potentially come against the company and then the directors and officers in their personal capacity. And so I think then the crisis management and communication is a very important element of how directors and officers then need to deal with the situation if it occurs. And so, we saw from the responses now previously, you need to have a robust response process in place and policy in place that can help you, control and respond to this event. It would be great if we could just have a stiff drink and pray it all away, but in reality there's going to be a lot of hard work to be done, and you need the right team on your side to be able to help you through this. And so if the first time you're thinking about a crisis management is at the point of the event, unfortunately it's far too late and you're going to come out on the wrong side of it. And so as part of an insurance portfolio, directors and officers and businesses need to consider that a robust cyber insurance program that can assist with that crisis management and communication and containment, and potentially ultimately liability. But then also for directors and officers in their personal capacity, D&O cover that can respond where potentially these liabilities come against directors and officers in their personal capacity. Thanks, Lwando.
Yeah, no, thanks to you, John. I think you've touched on quite some key points there. And I think the thing for me is that in my personal capacity, that always is the key point for me. That you suit in your personal capacity. You've done what you thought was best for the business. You've you've been engaging, putting processes and policies in place, but things can still go wrong and someone can still hold you liable. And that's exactly what we're trying to highlight, that from an external factor based incident where a hacker came into your environment, causing some trouble, you as a director can then still be held liable at the end of the day for any of those sort of concerns that John has raised. Now with that said, let's ask you guys another question. Would you want to be in that hot seat during a cyber incident? Would you want to be the manager responsible, as Jonathan mentioned, for those processes, for those plans, for the security? Would you want to be the MD of this business? Can we please run the second poll? Yeah, so the poll is live, so please give us your feedback. I'm expecting a little bit more of a measured response on this one. Yeah, go ahead, Jonah.
Trusting there'll be an outright winner on this one. And I think just while people are responding to the poll, what's important to understand as well, as you mentioned, the potential liabilities, even though you've done everything in your power to, to act in the best interests of your company and put in place the necessary technology, governance, because there's a strict liability under personal information protection legislation, even though individuals have done everything in their power to act, within their fiduciary duties or within what they believe to be the best interest and to implement the necessary security, even if there's been that kind of emphasis put in place and a breach occurs, you could still be held responsible under a strict liability. And so, even in that situation, you can't rely on the fact that, okay, well, I've done everything in my power to safeguard, we've invested money in our IT security. If somebody wants to get into the environment, to be honest, they'll find a way, and they probably will. And you can find yourself then still having to respond to regulatory scrutiny and otherwise because of the application of a strict liability under the legislation.
Sure. And I think, John, on that, it's really, you're really going to be tested on what you've done, because you can be held liable, but if you've evidenced that within your duties you've done all that you could have done, there is more likely chance that you won't be held as liable. Although there was an aggrieved party somewhere that wants their pound of flesh, there's a higher chance, and again, that's where which we'll talk about in the next, where the policy can assist you to prove yourself in the courts that you
That's
are.
right. And absolutely, Lwando, thanks for raising that fact. I mean, I see we're almost there at the end of the poll, 100% answer, so we can get into the answers now. But
yeah, so let's show the
the
results of the poll in the meantime. Sorry, John, let's show the results and then we can carry on.
Sure.
Great. So most of you said not for all the money in the world. So all of you are running scared right now, not wanting to take that fire. A couple of you said yes, but if I have the right team around me, I might feel a bit more confident. And there's just 16 of you who are very confident as of today. You would go ahead and handle that situation without any other interference. Over to you, Jano.
Thanks. Just to clarify the point that you mentioned on what's in the South African legislation, Companies Act, in terms of the business judgment rule, and essentially that says that even though the decision that you've taken may result in an adverse outcome, if you're able to evidence that you have in fact acted in terms of your fiduciary duty and consulted widely, acted in the best interest of what you believe to be in the best interest of the company, you may not necessarily be held liable for that decision, even though there was an adverse outcome, but you do need to be able to demonstrate that you applied yourself in terms of your fiduciary duties, as I say, consulted widely, done everything in your power to implement that kind of safeguard and measures in the environment. So correctly, we will talk to some of the coverage issues as we go, but I guess the main point to consider is, even though you have the defense in terms of the business judgment rule, you are potentially going to incur a lot of costs in your personal capacity for defense and to evidence that compliance with your fiduciary duties. And I think that's the biggest value of a directors and officers policy, and in fact where we see the majority of our policy response under these policies is in the legal defense costs. And so I'll touch on that now. But essentially, the purpose of a directors and officers insurance policy is threefold. Under the Section A is to protect and defend the personal assets of the directors and officers in their personal capacity. So where there's allegations brought against them, alleging breach of their fiduciary duties, and that claim is brought against the individual in their personal capacity, Section A of the directors and officers policy can defend and protect the director in their personal capacity for where there is a non-indemnifiable claim. So indemnification refers to where, in terms of company's MOI, they may have agreed to indemnify a director or an officer in the event of a claim against them. And the Companies Act does speak to indemnification and what is or is not allowed to be indemnified. But it could be that you end up in a situation where, let's say, like there's an insolvency action or a claim brought by the company itself against the directors and officers, and insured versus insured. So even though you have the indemnification available, you may not necessarily be able to rely on that indemnification in certain circumstances. So it's not an absolute that because you have the indemnification available that you can rely on that. So the directors and officers need to have cover in their personal capacities so they can trigger the policy for where they are held personally liable. Then part B is a company reimbursement. So where there has been an agreed indemnification and the company is paying for that loss on behalf of its director or officer, they can then claim for that loss under side B of the policy as a reimbursement. And then side C refers to company securities, and that's effectively to protect the company itself in the event of a breach of securities regulation. And I guess what we want to just highlight here as well is that the value of the policy really sits in the legal defense costs, and so those legal defense costs are on an advanced basis and have been incurred on an advanced basis under each of those insuring clauses and triggers up to a final adjudication. So the claim or the civil action, whatever it might be, could go through multiple processes and hearings, and it will be able to pay the defense costs right up until a final adjudication throughout those different insuring clauses. And
Jonathan, from when a director has been sued in a personal capacity, and where they have insurance and we're taking a case, in your experience, how long can these court cases take, or these disputes take?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does depend on the nature of the allegation. But it tends to be a long process because, as I say, because you directors are dealing with these matters in their personal capacity, it tends to go more of a litigation route, and so those can be lengthy. And as I say, the defense costs that are incurred in trying to defend or to justify their actions is what really takes the majority of the time. So it does tend to be a long process. It's very seldom that these matters are wrapped up very quickly under a DNO.
Sure. And would then the I2 policy be with the clients until from the start until the end?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the value of the policy is that you have access to both the defense costs right up front on an advanced basis, but also support from I2 and our panel of experts from the attorneys who are able to then assist individuals in that defense, both in bringing forward their justifications in terms of their compliance with fiduciary duties, but to manage the process through the entire legal process. And the policy can respond to each individual insured under the policy for their own separate defense. And so we help to manage that whole process with our insureds.
Fantastic. Sounds like a must-have for all our brokers and all our clients out there. Great. So let's move on. We've got one more question for you guys in terms of a poll. So going back to our scenario, where the root cause of the breach was due to an employee giving away the credentials. The question I would like to ask you is, do you believe that would actually trigger a cyber policy? Can we please load the final poll? John, there's a question from Reggie around the limit on the defense costs. Would you like to take that while we wait for the poll to conclude?
Yeah, thanks, Reggie. The defense costs are included in the limits of indemnity, so it would be the full limit of the policy on an aggregated basis. So what you'll find in terms of some of the detail on this is the policy structure does go into some extended costs cover, where you might find a sublimit, but in terms of the main policy defense cost, that is included in the main limit of indemnity and to the full limit of indemnity on an aggregated basis.
Great. So we've got over 400 responses. I'll give it just a few more seconds. Some mixed results on this one, but we'll talk through it just now. 10 more seconds, and then we can end the poll and share the results. Okay, let's end the poll and let's share the results, please. Right, as we're coming up to an election year, we almost have a overwhelming majority for the answer yes. But we might need to have a little bit of some coalitions in certain parts of our businesses. So the correct answer here is yes. And we'll talk about the triggers now as we move on into more on the cyber side of things. And hopefully for those of you that weren't sure, this will help you with your understanding. So what are the triggers of the policy? It's a network security breach. What does that mean in layman's terms? That means some kind of unauthorized access, some kind of hack, some kind of unauthorized use of your networks and system and your IT infrastructure, including your data as well. So given our scenario where unfortunately you were duped via a phishing attack to give your credentials over to the attacker, the use thereof of those credentials will then fall into the category of unauthorized use, which would then trigger the policy under the network security breach trigger of the policy. There is another trigger of the policy, and that is around the data and the privacy side. And this talks to, for example, an unintentional breach to the right of privacy of any third party. That privacy could then be also for your employees. An example would be if you're posting on social media as some information, and you unintentionally breach the right to privacy either of an individual or of a business. You've shared information that you weren't meant to be sharing, and you've caused some damages to that third party. The policy will then also be triggered. From a data perspective, again, because you as the insured remain the custodian of all your data, regardless of whether you house the data internally in your own systems, on your own premise, or you offshore that to a third-party service provider, that data, should there be a compromise, would then trigger the policy under the third-party element for any potential liability that comes from that. So going back to our scenario, unfortunately, where you've been duped into clicking on the wrong link, giving your credentials, you'll feel bad, but you will have the comfort that the policy will then respond, as that is the intention of the policy. Let's quickly just sort of round out into what do you then get? Now you've suffered this breach, you've had this ransom note, you're sitting there with your team, you're unable to do any business. What would you get if you have a cyber insurance policy as part of your incident response and backing you up? So there are three pillars here, as you'll see. There's incident response, and that talks to how do we manage the actual incident, the incident triage, the containment, the identification of what happened, what's been impacted, and how far has the breach spread. You'll get the team to also assist you with any data and systems recovery that might be required following the breach, should there have been any damage within the network. It would also give you access to legal guidance. So as we mentioned under the DNO section with Jono, there's a lot of regulatory requirements that you might have to follow. There's obviously the information regulator under POPI as well, with their own regulations and rules that you have to follow. And the legal team that you have access to will be experts in understanding those environments and then guiding you through what the steps that you need to take to ensure that you comply with any notifications that you have to make to those specific regulators. So all their time and all the costs will then be covered. Then there's crisis management. So this is quite a big one that we may not talk enough about. And this talks to how do you manage your reputation? When businesses suffered cyber incidents, part of those large costs come from the reputational damage that you suffer and the lost business as a result of that faith and that trust that has then been lost in your business. And as you can imagine, getting new clients costs you a lot more than keeping the ones that you have. And that's, again, part of why you have a crisis management team. This will help you to train a spokesperson internally. It will help you to craft messages to speak to your staff, because staff can also be a point of a leak in terms of the information that's happening around a breach and cause more damage externally than not. And if you give them the time and you share the right information and the right way to proceed, it will then help relay their fears and help contain your breach as much as possible to your business. So that's the crisis team comes in. You will help you with those messages, whether to be your staff or to external or to any stakeholders, help you to share the relevant critical information and not share information that will lead to further damages, where potentially a ransom demand could then increase following any information that you then leak after that. We also include notification costs. So part of the POPI Act says that you have to then notify any affected parties. There's a cost to notifying those parties. The policy will then kick in to cover you for those costs as well. Remediation services are included as part of the incident response, and then the big one is the cyber extortion. So in our example, you had a nasty ransom demand saying, click here to start the process to pay that ransom. Firstly, most ransoms nowadays are given in some kind of cryptocurrency. Do you have the facility to change rands or dollars into those currencies? Most of us would say no, especially a smaller business. The policy gives you access to those kind of things. But more importantly, it gives you access to specialist ransom negotiators. This team knows how to speak to threat actors. They know how to identify threat actors. They know how to make sure that what they say they have actually is there. So they've said in that example that they've got access to all your servers and they've stolen your data. How are you going to prove that? Instead of knee-jerking and paying over the ransom without validating, our team will be able to do that for you and give and then give the assurance that either yes, they do have what they said, therefore the situation is more serious than maybe we anticipated, or no, this guy it's just a chance that we can ignore it and we'll carry on with the recovery in the back end. So we'll give all of that, and then where it's deemed that the only way to help you recover is to pay the ransom, the policy will then take that next step and help you to pay that ransom, and those costs are then covered as part of the extortion element of the policy. So it's quite a lot that goes into incident response, on the back of cyber incident. Then we've got to consider, what's our first party impact? What do we do without being able to contact our clients, without being able to service our clients for a number of days? There's a potential loss of revenue there, and that's your business interruption. The policy will then help you to reimburse you for those days that you have suffered that business interruption following a waiting period of usually between 12 and 24 hours, depending on your policy. Those costs will then be reimbursed based off calculation, which will take into account past months and past years similar time period and what they've been anticipating in terms of your current revenue and profits. This will also include things like increased cost of working. Do we need to hire additional resources to come and assist? Does your staff need to work overtime either at night or over weekends? You need to compensate those individuals and those teams for their time. The policy will then assist with that compensation. The policy then makes provision for fines and penalties. And we state that to the extent insurable by law. So where we are legally allowed to pay those fines and penalties, the policy will then be able to assist in covering those fines and penalties. Another element of the policy then becomes your third party. So what happens to third parties? So if you had a data breach, that data has then been used against those individuals to perpetrate other fraud. Those individuals obviously suffering some damages, and they realize this is only happening because of the data breach that your business has suffered, and now suing you for those damages. We will then help with the defense and settlement of those suits, and this will arise from compromised data, as well as if your clients' environments are used to cause damage to other clients' environments as well. So all of that liability will be picked up under the policy, including your digital space, as mentioned. So if you're posting on your website or posting on social media, and something comes from that, whether it be a defamation or some kind of damages to a third party from there, the policy will then also be triggered for that. So all in all, you get quite a lot from your incident response, given your IT forensics, your legal service providers, your crisis team, as well as your ransom negotiating team, to you as your first party losses, so your day-to-day operational costs that are kicking in because you're unable to trade. We'll cover you for that. And then also at some stage where there's third party, and you can see based on what Jonathan mentioned earlier on in terms of the liability comes onto your directors. There's also liability comes onto the business, where the businesses then get sued on the back of a cyber incident. The cyber policy would also make room to cover that as well. Yeah, so that brings us to almost at the end. Just want to share a couple of things for you to remember. We've spoken around, we've spoken around how this one incident is not only to do with your systems and your data and your network, but can also severely impact your directors and your officers in their own personal capacity, given the companies that, given the fiduciary duties that they have, given that there could be some third party who feels aggrieved and wants to blame you as a manager for that incident. And some things to consider is, we spoke about the governance before putting the policies in place, ensuring that you've looked at your technology stack, you've looked at your security stack. Also, the other thing that you could be sued on is how did you handle the incident? Did you actively trigger those incident response plans? Did you notify your insurer as soon as you were made aware, for them to also assist and start taking some of those costs? Or were you incurring costs which are now all borne by the business, and shareholders wants to then recover those costs by suing you for those decisions? So again, some of those things to remember. From a cyber side, we always say that no security is infallible. Some of the biggest and most secure businesses in the world have had some kind of breaches. The stats, unfortunately, are not on our sides, where a lot of our businesses are being compromised, and some of them are not even aware. And with that being the case, how would you even identify? And once you identify, it might be too late for you to then recover from that. So damages can be quite significant, through that. We always say, please understand your risks. Do your assessments, do your regular risk management checks. Ensure that you know what is in your business from a data perspective, what's in your business from a technology perspective, and also understand the legal side of things. What are your regulatory requirements when it comes to suffering a breach and following those protocols. How an incident is managed can severely impact the company's reputation. We both spoke about trust and reputation being a key factor following a breach, whether it is just the director being sued or it is the business as a whole. From a customer and client perspective, would I want to give a business my data knowing that they are not secure, knowing that they are not doing all that they can do to safeguard my data? Most likely not. I'll probably find a competitor. And in today's world, there are possibly many competitors that can do exactly the same thing and can offer a high level of security. Effective incident response is always going to be key. And the last point there is just to check your policy wording for sufficient cover. So again, you purchase these policies. There's a reason why you purchase the policies, but ensure that you understand what is it offering you, what are the limits, what are the terms and conditions. Are there any pitfalls that you need to be aware of that might find you thinking you will cover or you don't have cover? Just go through that, and we're always happy to assist with any questions around our policies and our wordings. And so get in touch with us anytime, when we're always happy to assist with that. Anything from your side, John, to add on some things to remember?
Thanks, Lwando. Yeah, just some things to add, just in terms of the directors and officers liability policy in particular, where we talk to checking the policy wording and sufficiency of cover. I guess it's just important to understand, both from the cyber policy and the DNO, that not all policies are created equal. And it's very important to, kind of know what is excluded from your policy and what conditions may be applicable, because the devil's always in the detail. So I guess just some pointers to look for in terms of the directors and officers liability. Your policy should include investigation costs. You shouldn't have any automatic insured versus insured exclusions, because, as I say, that could invalidate some cover where there's a company claim against an individual director, or where you have derivative actions for shareholder actions. You want to be able to cover insurable fines and penalties. And so while that's yet untested in the cyberspace in terms of regulatory fines and penalties, most policies will exclude fines and penalties other than those that are insurable by law. And so if there is an insurable final penalty levied by a regulator, for example, then potentially your policy can respond to those. And I think just no overly broad cyber exclusions, which may invalidate cover. What you will find is that because there's more specific policies intended to respond to entity cover, being the cyber liability policies that Lwando has discussed, that should be an exclusion under your D&O policy, because the intention is to respond to the individual insureds in their personal capacity. But you want to make sure that there's no, as I say, overly broad exclusion, which then invalidates cover under your D&O policy. And then I guess one of the other important ones is no exclusion relating to failure to effect and maintain insurance on the D&O side, because there is more specific insurance in place, being cyber liability and data protection. And so if as a business you have actively made the decision not to purchase this insurance, and your D&O policy then is expected to respond, and you have that kind of an exclusion in the policy, you could potentially kick that out. So as IT, one of the values that we believe we bring in terms of our directors and officers insurance is that we don't have standard exclusions around a failure to effect and maintain insurance. We don't have standard exclusions around insured versus insured. And so while those may be brought in by endorsement on case-specific policies, it's not a standard. And so we believe that does create a far broader policy response if the D&O policy is called on to respond under a cyber breach. And then I guess then just be very aware of some of the exclusions under the policy, in particular things like property damage, which could be a result of a cyber breach, but then again the professional services, which is an exclusion under your D&O policy, but very relevant in the technology space. So where you're a technology service provider, you also have cyber related liabilities, and so you need to have a professional indemnity policy that responds to that element of your provision of professional services from a cyber perspective, but then also the cyber liability policy for your own incident response and potential first party loss costs. So just very important to understand that your D&O policy is going to exclude professional services. And so you need to have that more specifically insured through the correct professional indemnity and or cyber policy where you have clients who are providing technology services. That's it from our side. Thanks, Lon.
Awesome. Thanks, John. I think those are very key points to understand, as a differentiator that we then consider as part of underwriting. So before we wrap up, ladies and gentlemen, there is a competition running at the moment for Cyber Awareness Month. If you weren't sure, we are in October. It is Cyber Awareness Month. What we are offering is that for all those that are joining us for iTOOsdays, from the start of the month until the end of the month, you will all go into a draw and enter to win a free My Solution policy. So this is a personalized cyber policy that we will cover you for a full year. And the package, and there are 3 packages that we're giving away. So there'll be 3 winners. And for you to enter this competition, it's just by being here as you are now, and especially by joining us at the end of the month, where we will have an in-depth session around the My Solution and personal lines offering. Our very own Candice Toprick will be presenting, and some of the key topics that she'll be covering there is cyberbullying, as well as express kidnapping. So please join us on the 31st. Don't miss that one out. Next week, we're looking a little bit deeper into the mind of a hacker, the psychology of cybercrime. We'll have our claims handler, Sadia Mather, who will be presenting on that topic and giving us a little bit more insights into, how do criminals really think and what are they all about? And she's done a lot of work around that and research, and hopefully, and we will have an exciting session for that. So thank you again for joining us today. I know we're at the end of the hour. Any questions that have been picked up, we'll try and take them offline. But thank you for joining us again for another Tuesday. Thank you, Jono, for your time and your valuable insights on the DNO. Always good to collab with the team and just share how these policies and risks can really cross-pollinate, for your businesses.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we look forward to seeing you again next week. So take care, stay warm, and yeah, get your clients a DNO and a cyber policy ASAP. Catch you next week. Thank you.